One of the most striking manifestations of globalization is a phenomenon of international business, where an important role is played by subjects of international economics, supporting and deepening the internationalization processes in global environment. The transnational or multinational corporations, TNCs. TNCs, as a result of scientific and technological revolution development, are one of the most important and most dominant phenomenon of modern global economy. The Conference of United Nations Organization on Trade and Development provides in its World Investment Report the following definition. Transnational corporations are legal entities or entities without legal personality consisting of parent companies and their foreign affiliates. The parent company is defined as an enterprise that controls assets of other entities in countries other than the mother country, usually by owning a capital stake. Foreign affiliate is a legal entity or entity without legal personality in which an investor, as a resident in other economy, holds a share that allows a long-term interest in managing of this company. Ruckman in 2006 argues that transnational or multinational companies are businesses that produce and sell their products in more than one country and create added value. Usually they consist of a parent company located in the country of origin of the company in home country and at least 5 branches located in so-called host country, for example, of foreign affiliates. A multinational country is considered to be a company that conducts research, production, sales, respectively, other than activities in different countries, not just where it has its headquarters. At the same time, TNCs actively create relatively stable, internationally operating corporate networks with their suppliers, customers, and cooperating partners. They create a considerable amount of profit for investment in research and development, and thanks to the creation of corporate networks, they significantly influence the choice of technology later expanding on a global scale. Sakova characterizes multinational enterprise as a company that is managed from a single country, but performing operations in other countries. She points out that it is often difficult to determine whether the company is a multinational enterprise, as there is a hidden fact that the owners of a company are foreign entities. TNCs can be performed in private, public, or mixed ownership, and can be owned by the bodies of host and domestic country. Mostly they act in the form of a joint stock company within the holding structure. Transnational processes and relationships mean something beyond spanning the border of state-national. Transnational economy is characterized by the key role of transnational corporations. Transnational corporation is such a company that owns, either wholly or partially, controls and manages their assets, generating income in more than one country, is involved in international production, and is financed by foreign direct investment. In terms of international economic relations, it is important to analyze the consequences of international corporations acting in global economy and states policy. It can be noted that these consequences are quite contradictory. In terms of benefits for states in which they operate, there are advantages such as unemployment decreasing, the rise of economy, a bigger amount of taxes being collected, the arrival of new technologies, and scientific and technological developments. By using the comparative advantages and private business development, the production is getting cheaper. Concentration of resources enables the realization of demanding investment projects that would not be possible. To sum up, we can say that TNCs increase the wealth of the world. Krachenkova and Vojotovic classify among additional advantages so-called general and specific competitive advantages, such as proprietary technology, goodwill based on brand or trade name, the economies of scale, of large volume in purchase, of a large volume in funding, large volume in distribution, of a large volume in advertising. Next, government protection, human resources management, the ability of multinational marketing to gain multinational resources, multinational diversification, and management experience. In terms of the advantages of TNCs, the oligopolistic nature of international corporations can undermine market forces and allow unreasonable profits. In order to maintain its influence, they often support various authoritarian regimes. TNCs strengthen the dependence of less developed countries on the richest countries. By moving production of countries with lower standard of living and wages, they can hinder the growth of living standards. By transferring of assets to countries with lower social contribution of payments, they minimize the tax burden. Global maneuver of multinational corporations generally weakens states' abilities to pursue autonomous economic policies, which, especially in case of weaker economies, is the only option to meet the demands of foreign investors. This is done by providing incentives, exemptions, investment incentives, adapting social and labor legislation and education, etc. The vast majority of transnational corporations mostly execute their international business by exporting their foreign direct investments to different countries worldwide. Especially by investing abroad, TNCs have increased their turnover in recent decades, and in this way, they have developed into unbeatenable and superior multinational economic giants. A significant part of what today is referred to as foreign trade means the movement of goods and capital inside within the globally organized companies. The aim of this strategy is to increase the profitability of the whole chain consisting of various parts of global corporations. Fabrice states that this global company organizes its business from research and development through production and distribution to final sales and marketing. As an internationally integrated complex, it draws materials from the cheapest sources, manufactures or completes assembly in place with the cheapest labor, and its managerial and technical resources are used as economically as possible. This allows it to stand out on the markets of individual countries very flexible and efficiently. In competition with domestic firms, it therefore becomes very often much more successful, which can lead to gradual weakening and disappearance of small and medium-sized domestic firms. Researchers have considered the impact of sectors that have a direct impact on health, especially tobacco, food, beverages, and alcohol, extractive industries and harmful products, and pharmaceuticals. In this class, we will use tobacco industry as an example. Globalization tends to increase the structural power of corporations in their relationships with states, primarily by increasing the opportunities for exit from any given national economy. Tobacco companies must take account of both supply and demand factors. On the supply side, this means that they must be able to grow or source tobacco leaf in a cost-effective way, and manufacture cigarettes and other tobacco products from it. Transnational tobacco companies will have structural power where economies rely on the employment provided by their investment in leaf growing or cigarette manufacture, and the income taxes and export earnings that flow from this. Their room for maneuver will be substantially increased where there are many countries from which they can source or potentially source tobacco leaf, and alternative countries in which they can situate manufacturing sites. The more structural power tobacco companies have, as a result of the dependence of any given country on the employment provided by leaf growing or cigarette production, the more likely that country's government is to oppose effective tobacco control policies at the national and global levels. Demand creation is particularly important for tobacco companies, yet the nature of their product has led to government actions designed to affect the way the product is sold, priced, or marketed, which may curtail transnational tobacco companies' freedom of action or affect their ability to make profits. Like any companies, to be viable, transnational companies must be able to benefit from sufficient demand for their products and be able to adequately market these and find suitable retail outlets. The more national markets transnational tobacco companies have access to, the more protected they are from the potential impact upon their profits of the actions of any given government, although they will, of course, attempt to maximize sales in all markets. Furthermore, taxes on the sale of tobacco products may also be an important source of income for governments, and heavy reliance on such income has historically been used to increase transnational tobacco companies' bargaining power. This may be particularly important in some developing countries where the capacity to collect income taxes efficiently may be lacking. Demand for tobacco products is different from that of other products for two reasons. First, nicotine is highly addictive, and much of the demand for tobacco products is sustained by this. Document research has shown that much product development and marketing, for example to young people, by tobacco companies has been aimed at creating and sustaining this addiction. Regulatory measures must thus recognize that addiction distorts consumption choices when compared to other products. Second, governments have developed tobacco control policies in response to the damage to public health from tobacco use, most of which are aimed at curtailing demand. There are a variety of means by which governments have attempted to restrict demand for tobacco products, including education and awareness campaigns, the introduction of warning labels, product disclosure regulations, advertising and sponsorship bans, taxation to raise the price of tobacco products, smoking restrictions in public and workplaces, and tobacco cessation support programs. Rich countries appear to be the ones that are the home for companies understood as multinational corporations, and investments are coming out to abroad. By means of foreign direct investments, those countries pull strings in other countries, and they increasingly strengthen their economic and political power. Poor countries will again become those ones benefiting from investment from abroad, and their economy is increasingly becoming dependent on other countries. On the other hand, if on the market of a particular country there are two or more equally powerful companies in a particular sector, it can have a very positive effect. A writer argues that an equivalent competitive struggle is being created in which each of the companies has equal conditions and opportunities, and they influence each other. This condition is probably the best, since it is the most suited for a customer who has a choice. Therefore, a great emphasis should be put on antitrust laws, and the legislation should drive the economic situation to such conditions. Fears from major investments of foreign companies are reflected in particular in small economies. There are also often concerns to possible adverse long-term effects of foreign direct investment on the balance of payments. The policy of foreign companies may appear as incompatible with the objectives of national economic and social policy with regard to national security. Different aspects of foreign direct investment impact and differing national targets have produced various reactions by governments to foreign direct investments control. Regarding the outflow of capital in form of the foreign direct investments, most governments do not put any restrictions. However, when it comes to the flows of capital and investment from abroad, a wide range of approaches have appeared. From the unobstructed inflow, except in cases when capital inflows threaten the national security, to very severe restrictions linked to the protectionist policy. Tactics at the United States state level have included the use of contract lobbyists, campaign contributions to legislators, contributions to legislators' political caucuses and parties, the provisions of various gifts, honoraria, corporate hospitality, and charitable donations, alliances with other interest groups, and the use of front groups such as bogus restaurants and hotel associations to influence state legislation. Indirect attempts to influence policy have generally comprised efforts to undermine the scientific evidence on tobacco and health. This tactic has been central to industry responses to evidence since the 1950s. For example, of the adverse health effects of smoking, addictive nature of nicotine, and the dangers of secondhand smoke. Documents show that these indirect attempts have often been coordinated through front organizations and paid consultants. The Council for Tobacco Research, for example, formed in 1954, was designed to fund independent scientific research on the link between smoking and lung cancer. But industry documents reveal its true purpose to cast doubt on that link. McDaniel and others have analyzed the activities of transnational tobacco companies, issue management organizations using industry documents. The International Committee on Smoking Issues, formed in 1977 by 7 tobacco corporation chief executives, built a global network of regional and national manufacturing associations in order to coordinate anti-tobacco control strategies, later changing its name to Infotep. In 1992, Infotep was replaced by 2 smaller organizations the Tobacco Documentation Center, and Agro Tobacco Services, the latter of which supports the industry-backed International Tobacco Growers Association in promoting their arguments about the economic importance of tobacco to developing nations. Transnational tobacco companies have sometimes acted through or benefited from international governmental institutions. For example, US-based transnational tobacco companies recruited the power of the US Trade Representative to further their goals through the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, while Japan, Korea, and Taiwan bowed to the US demands to remove their bans on tobacco imports. Thailand resisted and was forced to do so as the result of the GATT disputes panel. The panel ruled that Thailand's ban on imports was discriminatory and thus in contravention of the GATT rules. Although it is accepted that tobacco harm health, tobacco control measures such as advertising bans were considered legitimate as long as they were applied equally to domestic and foreign companies, and Thailand has since successfully introduced a range of measures, including increased size and prominence of health warnings, the expansion of smoke-free areas, and increases in tobacco taxation. Alcohol and tobacco industries are faced with legislative restrictions such as advertising constraints, labeling regulations, supply and retail restrictions, and are susceptible to tax increases and disapproval from health advocates. Both industries use similar strategies to market their products through product placement, target marketing to youth and specific ethnic groups. They develop and provide potentially counterproductive public education campaigns so as to appear socially responsible and in an effort to defeat tighter controls on products. The alcohol and tobacco industry have demonstrated through the documents that they are opposed to regulations which threaten their sales and have used similar methods of lobbying and use of front groups to delay progress. Further, it can be drawn from these documents that the alcohol industry is concerned about public health groups and governments implementing similar strategies for alcohol products that have been used to regulate and control tobacco. Currently, transnational companies, as well as other businesses in their activities in international environment, are forced to take into account some factors relating to global activities, such as environment, human health, corporate social responsibility, and regulation of different interests. SNAR states that waste or pollution becomes a key indicator of unnecessary cost and inflexible management. However, many governments do not emphasize enough on prevention and solution of environmental issues. Along the so-called environmentally advanced countries can be classified, for instance, Scandinavian countries, improving environmental legislation. Constantly evolving technological innovation for the benefit of environment and reducing environmental charges for the least polluting countries. Particularly developing countries and third world countries, of which legislation is generally weak and insufficient, are used by transnational companies. This results in a situation where there is an endangering human health as a physical threat from the extreme loads and exploitation, chemical and bacteriological threats. These countries are faced with transnational companies which seek to circumvent the health and plant health standards being set by the governments. The essential tragedy of current economic globalization is that the fate of planet in hands of impersonal institutions that are not motivated by the concern for the welfare of Earth inhabitants, but the desire for their own growth and profit. Due to the natural characteristics of transnational companies, it cannot be expected to be behaving responsible as most discerning consumers require. Impersonal form of ownership and organization leads to the fact that this responsibility is too sparse and slowly disappears completely. There have been adopted standards such as non-interfering into government affairs as well as rules related to investment activities. As reported by Totaro in year 2000, the first code of conduct in international investing was adopted by the International Chamber of Commerce in 1972. Its aim was to establish guidelines and rules which would enforce TNCs to contribute more to the realization of national targets in countries where they operate. Obligations of both sides have also been delineated. On one hand, there are duties of transnational companies such as to respect the host country laws, to dispute settlement between transnational companies and the host country at the court chosen by the host country, non-interference in domestic political affairs, and finally, respecting national sovereignty. On the other hand, there are obligations of national governments, such as fair and equal treatment of transnational corporations and domestic firms, compensation in case of TNC's activities nationalization, and at last to facilitate funds transfer of TNCs. Globalization process clearly contributes to blurring of existing stereotypes, races, and cultures, and the long-standing presumption of superiority. For a long time, transnational corporations will take strategic location in world economic affairs. There are many things transnational corporations can do and nation-states cannot. However, there is only one important thing that government can do and TNC cannot: to set a commitment of huge masses of people. Based on analyzed transnational corporation development, Rupert provides the following direction. Continued division of central office headquarters, further transfer of key business processes to developing countries, greater managers integration of different nationalities, increased use of R&D from other sources than own corporation labs, effort to restructure the company, continuing trend of fusing processes and creating joint venture and strategic alliances, adaptation to the new e-economy,